Question already. Can one apply for ED at one school and also for regular decision at another school at the same time? That is a phenomenal question. We will be getting to that. I'll put that in the back pocket. Thank you for asking. Here's where we're going to start, folks. The state of the nation. And no, this isn't a 90-minute address where you have to stand up and clap for me every time I say something prophetic. No, we're not doing it that way. This is just an opportunity for me to share with you what's going on across the United States. What you're looking at right here, to the untrained eye, would look like Pac-Man eating a piece of pizza and an ice cream cone without any ice cream on it at the same time. What you're really looking at here is the number of colleges that have a 50% or higher admit rate compared to the 30 to 40% compared to the 20 or lower percent. So remember how before I mentioned to you that there's a college out there for everyone, that you don't need a 4.9 GPA to go to college? This graph is proof of that. Who here has heard of the University of Pittsburgh? I assume many of you have, not just because of Pitt, the new show on HBO, but because it's a well-known institution, public school that a lot of kids from Maryland apply to. They have a 53% admit rate. The University of Pittsburgh is a phenomenal institution. And for many students, it's a likely or target school. You have other schools out there of a similar ilk. The College of Charleston, for many students in the area, can be considered likely or target school. Colleges like Ohio State find their way onto a lot of lists in your area. And I could go on and on, but I'm not here just to list colleges. I'm here to make sure that you understand that this doesn't need to be a stressful process. That said, plenty of people ask me, well, I'm a graduate myself of Dartmouth, right, or of Yale. So does that mean that my student has a better chance, or why wouldn't my kid be able to get in? And it's because we live in a society where we tend to be very focused on certain things, one of them being prestige. Now, I'm not here to try and convince you that you don't need to apply to prestigious schools. While I know that data shows you don't need to go to Yale to be successful, I know that that's not tonight's platform. But what I can do is help you to understand why there is this disconnect, why we have this feeling that schools like Columbia, UCLA, Penn are sort of like not terribly hard to get into, but I should apply to them no matter who I am. And these numbers show you what. 30 years ago is quite a bit of time. I was 5 when this data was taken, just to give you a sense, right? But back then, some of these schools that now have single-digit admit rates had 30+% admit rates. USC used to be called at that time the University of Spoiled Children because it was basically where you could park your kid to go enjoy themselves for a few years in Los Angeles before they went on to greater things, right? Well, USC's admit rate this past cycle, 10.2%. You look at a school like UPenn, who's reported here as 33, 4.8%. The disconnect is that when you were in college, parents, the numbers were different. The numbers that Stanford used to have are the admit rates of schools nowadays along the lines of University of Michigan. Stanford was at 19.3%. That's right around what UMich's number was this past cycle. Stanford is now in the 3 to 4% range any given year, right? You look at this list right here. Boston University, a school that when I was applying to college 15, 16 years ago, BU was on my list as a target. Now, I was a good student, but BU was a school where a lot of kids could get into. And now, a lot of these schools are boasting single-digit to close to single-digit admit rates. There's a reason for that. The truth is, we're applying to too many schools, folks. If we were in a room right now, I'd ask someone, do you know a senior right now or a senior from last year? And certain people would raise their hands, a sibling or so on. And in that conversation, I'd come to find out that that student's friend applied to 16 schools. 16. 16 is an average number that people are considering now. When I started this business, when I started in college counseling back in 2015, the average was around 8. 8 is now 16. So when everyone's applying to 16 to 18 schools, and many of them are in a U.S. News World ranking top 60, 70, because we think that ranking seems to matter all of a sudden, no wonder that these schools are getting harder to get into. That BU's admit rate is now a 10.7. Between the pandemic and today, there are 2 million more applications that go out.
Connection.
There are 2 million more applications that go out any given year than there were in 2020. Okay. Those 2 million went to the same 70 schools. Everyone goes, oh, what's 70? Look at the US News World Rankings. So when we focus on ranking, when we focus on prestige, what we're doing is we're falling into line with the Lemming crew. We're not applying to Emory because we know it's the right fit for us down in Atlanta, Georgia, with their research opportunities and their medium size and their focus being more on academics and sports. We're doing it because somebody told us it's a good school. We're not willing to apply to the University of Iowa or Iowa State because it's in Iowa. It has an 88% admit rate, even though their engineering programs are stronger than half the Ivies. We would rather focus solely on the name, on the prestige, and focus on what we need to be successful to get to where we want after college. And that is why we are seeing these numbers here. So, what do you need to know? What you need to know is that there are over 4,000 accredited universities in the United States. You need to know that over half these schools accept about 50+% to 95% of their students. And that does not mean that they're any less impressive or strong institutions. Schools like the University of Kansas have an 89% admit rate because they're such a large institution that the only way they fill their class is by taking the majority of students who apply. Doesn't mean that Kansas isn't a good school. It's just what they need to do to make sure they have their enrollment, right? Because let's be honest, I might be able to talk a few of you into why U Kansas and Iowa might make sense, but the moment you get into a University of Maryland or Virginia Tech or something on the Eastern Seaboard or closer to home, you're going to take that over one of these flyover Midwest states. And I'm not here to tell you not to do that, but that's why admit rates lie to you. It doesn't mean that that school is not as good as another. It just shows you what they need to do to get their number, their yield. So don't allow an admit rate to be the driving force. Allow what it is that you need from college, academically, socially, distance from home. Asking the question, what size school do I want? How close do I need to be, or how far can I be from the city? Do I have medical reasons to be closer to home? Do I love my family and not want to be more than 4 hours from them? Or do I want to go explore somewhere new? Those questions are what are going to allow you to build a good and balanced list, not US News World Rankings. So before I actually dig us in to what these colleges are looking at, let's pause here. There's some questions coming in. Please feel free to ask other questions around the state of the nation collegiately. Going back to your question, can one apply for ED at one school and also for regular admissions at others at the same time? Yes, as long as you can't click ED to more than one school, but you can go ED and then EA, meaning early action, to others. ED is the binding agreement where if you get into that institution, you're going. You need to be prepared to do that. You, your student, and your school counselor will all sign an ED agreement that if you break has implications. So while it does increase your chances at any given school, it is binding. EA just means you apply early to find out earlier. Do teens on the spectrum of high function need SAT scores or ACT scores? It depends, all about the school. If a school requires them, then absolutely. If the school does not require them, then no, you don't need them. But we are starting to see a trend back to testing, especially at the more selective schools and at schools in the South. We're going to revisit that in a moment. Will a slide deck be available after the call? Yes, you can email me. I threw my email in before. I'll throw it in again. I can send you the slide deck, and this is being recorded. Miss Heald, who is the CCN at BCC, will be sharing it out with all the other schools so you have access. So let's dive into what these colleges are looking for. There is a common misconception that the only thing that matters to schools is a test score or a grade in this class. And while those things can be beneficial, there's a term, holistic review, holistic admissions, and it is very real. It's very true. There's a number of things that tend to go into the review process here. So when you consider things along the lines of, oh, my test score is only a 1380 and that school's a 1420. As long as your extracurriculars are exceptional, you have good essays, your grades are strong, you can go test optional and be okay, assuming that they are test optional, right? Don't let a test score necessarily be the reason that you think you can't apply to a school, or a high test score be the reason you think you should apply to a school. The reason the Ivies are bringing back testing is quite frankly because they got so many applicants who shouldn't be applying to schools with a 4% admit rate solely because the test score was removed. So all of a sudden, a kid with a 3.6 GPA from BCC and one AP was like, oh, well, if Harvard's not requiring a test score, I'll take my shot. And while you have every right to do so, you have to imagine if you're a Harvard admissions officer, you want to read applications where students are serious. They're serious candidates. And so their claim, and Dartmouth did a 28-page piece on this, is that test scores are indicative of students who are more successful. Well, there's data to show that that's not necessarily true, but they put that together to make it seem more reasonable to require it again. Because quite frankly, we all know that test scores are only an indication of how well you did that day or how much money you might have spent to prepare and so on. That said, with the tests coming back, if you're from the Montgomery County area, especially from the schools closer to more affluent areas like Potomac, Poolesville, Bethesda, I can tell you right now that students are having greater success who have test scores than students who do not, because these schools know these zip codes. These schools know that when they have 100 kids applying to University of Michigan, and 70 of those 100 have a test score, they get to ask, why do these 30 not? So my suggestion is if you're a junior on this call, if you are a parent of a junior, and you're like, oh, well, schools are test option, I don't know, I would be considering taking a practice SAT or a practice ACT and seeing which one you do better at and using this winter, spring, summer to get the score you ideally want. But test scores are one piece of the holistic pie. The most important thing is always going to be grades, even as an athlete, especially at some of the more selective schools. You are a student athlete. You're a student on these campuses. There are things that are going to matter more than anything else, and academics tends to be at the top. But not just your GPA. Everyone seems to think that, oh, well, I'm an 8.4 APs, and even though they're Bs, that rounds out to an A and a 4.0, right? Not necessarily. You're competing with other students from MCPS. BCC, RM, Poolesville, a number of these schools have IB diplomas, and many of the MCPS schools offer APs. So a lot of the time you'll get questions like, how important are GPAs for admissions to smaller colleges, right? It's not about the GPA. It's about the grade. When you consider the grade, that is what schools look at. Every college is going to recalculate your GPA. They're going to remove ninth grade. They'll look at ninth grade to make sure there's no unbecoming grades, especially the more selective it gets, the more ninth grade is kind of part of the review. But the less selective, they just don't care. And they will focus on your 10th and 11th grade core curriculum classes and elective academic classes. So you're like, oh, well, I got 3 Bs and 3 As. And we look at one of the A's is in PE. You got 3 Bs and 2 As. Colleges don't look at PE unless you got a bad grade and they go, what the heck? They'll look at things like an intro to engineering class, an intro to business class, a philosophy class, because those are electives you chosen. They'll also look at your sophomore, junior year core curriculum, Spanish, science, so on. And they'll recalculate that GPA. And when they do so, for the purpose of the conversation, they're going to remove the weight from it so that they can recognize Bs as Bs. They'll tally up all the APs and IBs and honors and dual enrollment classes. It's not like that doesn't go, it goes unseen. That will be in a separate category right here. So you can go, you know what, the student had 2 Bs, but they took the most rigorous course schedule they could handle with an IB diploma. We're good. Then all of a sudden you have the kid who has 3 APs junior year, 3 APs senior year, which is a rigorous course load. It may not be as rigorous as is available, but it's rigorous. But in junior year, they had 3 Bs in their 3 APs. That student thinks, well, no, I still have a 4.0 because they're Bs, so they're counted as As. That is not how colleges see it. So make sure that as you're selecting your courses, you're considering an IB diploma versus APs, or you're just thinking, maybe I'm going to take my first AP this year. Ask yourself this: am I pushing myself as hard as I can while being able to maintain the grades I expect of myself? Because if you are, that's all I would ask of you. I've seen students go for the 5 APs and end up with the C. They just killed their dreams of that Ivy. I've seen students take 2 APs thinking, well, the easier it is, the easier it'll be for me to get the A's. But when you're being compared to other kids with 4 APs in junior year who had A's, does that help you? You need to find your balance. How important are GPAs for admissions to smaller colleges? Well, it's a good question, but I got to ask. Which colleges, right? We have Middlebury and Amherst, where your GPA is going to matter in medicine because they're the most selectives in the nation. You have great schools like Juniata or Shenandoah, where as long as you kind of graduate high school and have like a B to C average, you should be okay to get in. It kind of comes down to school by school basis. If colleges recalculate GPAs, how do you compare our students' GPA with the reported average GPA for each school? Well, it's a good question. The school report, BCC, WJ, RM, so on. Each school you apply to is going to send your school report. They're going to look at your GPA compared to that school report. So they'll see that. But then they recalculate it for their own purposes to compare student by student in their queue. So they'll see your GPA compared to your school GPA. That is a fair question. They're going to recalculate after that so they can decide which students are kind of in what category. Do colleges look at the high school course that some kids take in middle school? Yes, you'll be asked by some schools to complete something called STARS. STARS is a self-reported academic record in that you're offered the chance to upload your seventh and eighth grade courses. So you'll also see on your MCPS transcript that seventh and eighth grade courses that you passed are on there. So they will see those as well. So you took Algebra 1 and Spanish 1 in eighth grade, they will see that. Are IBs considered as prestigious as AP courses? There's an argument to be made that IBs are slightly above the AP curriculum. That is some people's opinion. I can tell you right now that IB is not for everyone. If you're willing to take on a rigorous course schedule, AP or IB works, but they are considered sort of equals in the eyes of colleges, just like SAT and ACT. There's not one test that's preferred, just whichever one you're better at. How do admissions committees distinguish between genuine passion, strategically packaged extracurriculars? Good question. I promise we're getting to activities. So to wrap things up with academics, the transcript, the way it matters is course rigor, followed by grades, followed by love of learning. So going sort of back to the question about genuine passion, love of learning comes out in two ways. The first is you're not just taking APs in the courses you're strong in. You're not just taking A push and AP lit and then taking on level chemistry or physics. You're taking it across the board. It's why, going back to my conversation, IB sometimes stands out because a lower level IB is an SL, which is still as rigorous as an AP, right? So you have to take IB chemistry or IB bio or IB physics along with your English history and Spanish HLs. But if you're going the AP route and you're pursuing highly selective schools, if you take AP Chem plus AP Lit, you're showing me a love of learning across the board, right? Just like it's, even if you remove that, you're taking honors English 11 and honors physics, you're showing me a love of learning across the board. So that's what I mean by the genuine aspect of the academia. Students who are really STEM focused, you'll see they do AP Comp Sci, they do AP Physics, but they take English 12 senior year. That's perfectly fine for a majority of schools, but the more selective you're talking, the more that love of learning component matters. How does foreign language work? I've heard you need at least 2 years in high school, which means that if you went to Spanish 3 with middle school, you need to go through Spanish 4 in high school. Not necessarily. If you did Spanish 3 through middle school, you've met your 3 requirements. What I can tell you is 2 is the bare minimum, 3 is the number that you want to shoot for, 4 or more is the ideal. You always want to go above and beyond the more selective the school. So, for example, if you look at Amherst College, it's a very selective liberal arts college, on their website, they essentially say, you're not getting in without 4 years of a foreign language. They strongly recommend it. Strongly, I believe, I remember, it's like italicized on there. So the more selective the school, the more you want to shoot for the 4 years, but 2 years is the requirement. So coming back to testing, I see other questions coming in. Let's start with the why, and then we'll talk about the nitty gritty and the background of it. The why here is because they can. Because it's a way that they can use a standardized program to sort of understand where you fall in the mean. The real why is because of rankings. I mentioned this before, but unfortunately, rankings include test scores, they include yield, they include things that shouldn't matter, but because they do, schools want higher test scores because it allows them to move up in the rankings. So you'll hear that a kid got into a school with money, and you look and that kid had like a 3.6 GPA and they got a 34 ACT or 1500 SAT. And so all of a sudden, you've met the requirement for any of these, like an Alabama and LSU, to go, not only are we accept you, but we're giving you our presidential scholarship, University of Arizona. So test scores are really beneficial for them to move up the rankings, and they'll give you money if your scores are high. Now, note, I didn't say schools like Harvard will give you money, or Emory will give you money, or Duke. Those schools view it as you're lucky to get in, now pay me $95,000 a year, right? But the less selective state schools, less selective private schools throw a lot of money out there. So if you're sitting here wondering like how I get into Harvard and don't pay full price, well, We're not having that conversation. But if you're sitting here wondering, how do I go to college and make it affordable, whether it's private or public? That's one of my favorite conversations. There are 1,000 schools out there with a 3.3 GPA and a 1,300 SAT. You get $30,000, $40,000 a year from this private school, $15,000 your in-state tuition from these. So test scores matter because of ranking. So as I mentioned before, no school prefers SAT versus ACT. To the individual who keeps posting the dual enrollment question, I promise I'll get to it. Okay. The SAT and ACT are equal in the eyes of every college. There's no preference. What matters is that you take the test that you're more inclined to do well on. So you're like, well, how do I know? You know how to do that. Take a practice SAT, take a practice ACT. You can go type into Google tomorrow or tonight, the Princeton Review practice SAT, the Princeton Review practice ACT. You can get one of the big practice books, do a practice test, get your score, and then decide which one, and you compare which one did you do better on, and then go with that test. Generally speaking, you do not want to take the test more than 3 times. There are 2 reasons for that. The first reason is you don't often see great improvement after exam 3. That's usually around where students plateau and start getting frustrated. The other reason is some colleges like University of Maryland and Georgetown require you to send all scores. So if you take it more than 3 times, you take it 5 times and you do well, all of a sudden you're showing them that you spent weeks, months, over a year preparing for this exam. When other students will have done it less, usually 3 is the number they're comfortable with. Anything more doesn't look great. So you don't ideally want to take it more than 3 times. I've seen students take it a 4th and do a little bit better, but most of the time 3 is the number. Because I promised I'd come back to it. What about dual enrollment classes potentially getting associated? Is it really a double-edged sword? I don't know what you mean by double-edged sword. Dual enrollment classes are good, but the issue with dual enrollment is you'll have students who do dual enrollment psychology or dual enrollment English because they don't want to take the AP. If your school offers the AP or IB, you should be doing that over dual enrollment. Dual enrollment is helpful if you want to show your interest in business. You take an intro to business class or philosophy because you want a college level philosophy class. Your school doesn't offer it. You go with the AP or IB that's available to you over dual enrollment, unless the dual enrollment is specifically interesting to your lens. Okay. So back to testing. It's going to be very important that you don't wait until this summer between junior and senior year to start testing. My general recommended timeline is the summer between sophomore and junior year is usually a good time to start preparing. The only reason not to then is really if you already have something lined up and you don't have time, which is understandable, or you're in geometry. Sophomore year, you're in geometry, junior year is algebra 2. The math on both these tests goes up into algebra 2. So if you're only starting algebra 2 in junior year, you probably want to wait until the end of junior year to start preparing. But if you're a sophomore in algebra 2 going into pre-calc, or you're a sophomore in pre-calc, you have all of the content under your belt already. Now you just need to learn the strategy. So sophomore into junior year is a good time to start preparing with your first exam in fall, unless you are in geometry or in sophomore year, in which case you start in spring, junior year. And that goes for both SAT and ACT. It looks like we're still getting some questions here about grades and transcripts. So I'm going to come back to that and then moving us to extracurriculars. We have, I think there were 3 questions here. How would a college look at a student if they took 1 AP class in 10th, but they are taking 5 their junior year? Will the one class be looked upon negatively? No, wouldn't be looked upon negatively. There's plenty of students who don't have access to more than 1 AP or 2 APs in sophomore year. Junior year is where that can really change. How heavily do schools look at outlier grades outside their preferred major? E.g., you have a 3.9 GPA, full IB diploma, but a B in HL history and AB calc, but then get 6 or 7 on IB econ. Well, here's the truth. The more selective the school, the more they care, right? Like we said, if you're looking at very selective schools like MIT or Duke, there's students who are applying with full IB diplomas and didn't get that B. Now we're talking about schools that are like a UMD, a Virginia Tech, schools that get a lot of application but are slightly less selective. You're putting in a lot of effort there. Remember, it's about the holistic admissions. So they'll see that, but they'll want to see what are you doing with the rest of your time. Maybe you have a lot of time spent in these amazing extracurriculars and you have a 1580 SAT. UMD is not going to mind that B or 2, but the more selective you get, the more they care. Uh, Students that take the engineering class and are able to earn credit through PLTW is a good idea to receive the college credit. I would look at the list of schools that accept it. You can type into Google PLTW credit and see which schools take it, so you know whether or not it's worth paying for. My take is a lot of the time it's not worth doing because you're spending like $300-400. But maybe you end up applying to a number of schools who accept it and it's worth doing. But look at the list. Okay. All right. Back to our regularly scheduled. If the SAT score is not quite there, but still much higher than your high school average, should you submit? Ooh, that's a really good question. Your school is going to send that school report. It's going to give the average SAT and whatnot at your school. So let's say you go to a high school where the average is 1200, you get a 1410, but the average at that school is a 14 at that college is a 1480. So you're below the average, but you're well above your mean. Yes, you should still submit. That will be more applicable for the most part to schools higher up in MCPS, closer to like Gaithersburg, Jonestown. And the reasons what there's one reason for that. The reason is because people are seeing more of an emphasis and spend on testing in Bethesda, Potomac, and so on. So what that means is that students are spending a lot of money on getting higher test scores, thinking that's going to make a difference. I can't tell you that it makes a huge difference or it doesn't make a difference. What I can tell you is you don't need to spend thousands of dollars on the SAT to get a good score. And more importantly, if you're not getting there, let it go and focus on the test optional schools. How do you find out what the school's average is? Just type it into Google. SAT average, UMD, so on. All right, I want to move us on to activities. Someone asked a moment ago, does UMD accept independent research projects? I'm a junior at BCC and planning to start one. An activity is anything you do spending time outside the classroom. That's a part-time job. That's volunteering. That's an independent research project. That is the internship you did last summer, the summer program you're doing this summer. That is a club, organization, sport you do at school or outside of school. Activities are pretty much anything that you spend a good amount of time doing outside the classroom. So that one 3-hour event you did in ninth grade because mom told you that if you didn't, she would take your Xbox away. No, that's not included in this conversation. Why? Because you didn't show any care commitment you did in ninth grade. That's not who you are now. Care, commitment, and consistency are the 3 C's we want to see, no pun intended, in activities. So some people will say something along the lines, we'll say something along the lines to the person who just asked if I could reduce the pace. We're recording this for a reason so that you can review that later for your notes. I got to keep the pace up so that we can cover everything in the next 30 minutes. I'm sorry. I hope you understand. Anything you spend a good amount of time doing outside the classroom matters. But the thing that matters most is your impact. Your impact in that community, in that organization, is what colleges, especially the more selective ones, seek. And impact doesn't mean that you have to raise $1 million for some volunteer organization. One of my favorite impacts I saw a student make recently is she found out about an organization. That organization is called the Red Poppy Initiative. She was told about it by a friend who lives in another state. And so she was like, okay, the Red Poppy Initiative helps collect feminine hygiene products that can be donated to women's shelters and other places and for people who are in need. And so she started talking to some of her friends about it, and like she wasn't getting a lot of traction. And she was like, "Okay, well, no one cares, no one wants to do it." Then all of a sudden, she found one other young lady at her school, and that young lady was like, "Yeah, this is a really good idea." And now at her school, that idea is becoming a club. It already has 25 members signed up, and their first event is going to be held at a local library in MCPS, where they're going to stand there for 8 hours and collect goods. And their goal is to do that at every MCPS library by the end of junior year. Right there, we're talking about impact, folks. Another impact could be, let's say that you're part of a club at school that's not doing too well. That club has 5 members and people don't really do anything. But you take the time to recruit more members and help reinvigorate that club. And now all of a sudden, that club that was dying out has 30 members because of what you did. That's an impact. Impacts can be small. What they do is they show me who you will be on any given college campus. And the reason that that matters is because you're only in the classroom for 3-4 hours a day in college, sometimes less. Sometimes you have days where there is no class, right? You have a lot more flexibility. So help me understand who you'll be on my campus. And that's why activities are so important. So from the independent research project that student asked about, the club or organization that you join and revamp, to the volunteering you do because you're interested in helping that community. Those are activities that matter to me as an organization and things that you need to be doing. And on the Common App, you can list up to 10 activities. And those activities are entered in this format. You get to list the name of the organization and your role and what you did. And you only get 150 characters, 150 characters total, not words, characters, to tell what you did. So it's not easy and it's going to take you time. It's something that you should be working on junior to senior year summer in your Common App to fill that out. How do colleges look at internships during 12th grade? That's tough. It's school dependent, but here's the thing. If I have a student who's doing an internship in senior year, and I have another student who's taking 5 AP classes or a full IB diploma, who show me greater course rigor, who show me greater academic focus, the internship may be interesting, right? And it may be something that's really connected to your future endeavor, so it might be worth doing. But you got to consider how it impacts the rigor that you're taking on and how important it is to you. How do colleges treat EC credits? I'm not sure what you mean by EC credits. Do colleges favor one activity more than another? No. They care about the care, commitment, and consistency. Sports look great because of the care, commitment, and consistency you have to show over those 4 years. Same as building your own Raspberry Pi processor because you have to take the time and energy to learn how to do it, to create it, to use. Are you allowed to start the Common App as a junior, as in right now? Theoretically, you can. You can work on the profile, family, education, testing, activity, writing tabs. I don't recommend it. I tell students start it in May of junior year. Your call, but I say there's no reason to start it now. You have all summer to work on it because most of the Common App doesn't even open up until August 1. August 1 is when the supplemental essays for schools tend to get released. Sometimes schools will release them a little bit earlier, but the one essay you can start towards the end of May, early June is the personal statement. The personal statement is the 650-word essay that goes to every college on your Common application. So whether you're applying to 3 Common App schools or 12 Common App schools, they're going to get this singular essay. So it's not about the school or why you like Penn State or why you love the idea of going to Harvard. It's about who are you? I'm not going to go any further there. That's an entire hour-long conversation. We will talk about that on another call, but the personal statement is the one that I tell students to start around the end of AP season, around late May, and work on that through mid to late June, early July. The reason for that is around early July to mid-July is when some colleges will start to release their school-specific essays. Why University of Texas at Austin, the Michigan essays, right? So by then, you want your personal statement done so you can start the other work and ideally get as much done as you can over summer. But most colleges will not release their essays until August 1st. And that's when in the Common App, you'll have access to each school's specific essays. One of the things we've been seeing is schools are starting to offer, some schools are moving away from essays. For example, the University of Virginia, for the first time, removed their essay this past cycle. Northeastern does not have an essay. These highly selective schools, and people are like, why? Well, the answer is simple. If you have no extra work to do, are you more likely to spend the $80 to apply to that school? Yeah, you've already done all the other work in there, so why not take a shot? So remember how before I said people are applying like 16 schools on average? That's why. Northeastern, 2 days before the deadline for early action, Northeastern sent out over 10,000 fee waivers to students across the nation in certain zip codes. So all of a sudden, students got an email from Northeastern saying, hey, if you want to apply to us, you can apply for free. Of course people did. Why wouldn't they? I can apply for free to a highly selective school. Now, are many of those students actually going to be good candidates? No. But the higher the application number, the lower the admit rate. The lower the admit rate, the more they move up in rankings. So again, to these colleges, the unfortunate truth is this is all a numbers game to them for ranking purposes. Why? Because people seem to care about rankings. Should rankings matter? Do they matter? Not in the United States. Sure, if you're an international applicant from China, from India, from Japan, and you're thinking I'm going to come to the US for school and then go back, I can tell you the ranking of the institution matters to get a job. I can tell you that in the United States, it does not. On the left-hand side, you'll see where it says PIQ. PIQ is personal insight questions. This is only for the UCs, University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, Berkeley, Santa Barbara. That school has its own application system. They allow you and ask for you to complete four essays that are 350 words each. That's why I listed them here. I'm not going to focus much on the UCs today, but I want you to know what PIQs was in reference to. And why did we do that? Why does it matter? In the application process, there's so much that is black and white, your name, what school you go to, and so on. They don't give a lot of personality of who you are at your core. And that's where the essays matter. They help me to learn about who each of you are as individuals, how likable you are. In fact, when they're reading your personal statement, they call it the freshman year roommate test. They've seen your academic information. They've seen your letters of recommendation from your teachers. They've seen all the academically oriented information, your extracurriculars, and they know who you are in that sense. Now show me why I'd want to spend time with you. So the biggest mistake people make on that personal statement is they brag about their greatest strength, their best activity. Falls flat. I don't care about that here. I'm looking for you to be open and honest. And that's why these essays matter. They allow you to share a side of you that I have not yet seen. So, to that point, we've covered essays, we've covered activities, we've covered a number of topics, and we are going to cover a number of questions. But it brings me to one of the biggest and most important parts of tonight's event: matchmaking. It's a boring, plain slide. Why did I throw it up? Because this is arguably one of the most important things you need to take away tonight. Harvard isn't the best school for most of you. Not because of your grades, not because of your test scores, not because I don't think you're good enough, because you don't know a thing about it. You know that it's called Harvard, and you know it's existed for a couple hundred years. And you know it's somewhere north of here, and you know it's a really good school. But you're only applying because somebody told you you should, or because a parent told you that you should take your shot there. Harvard isn't a good school for many students because it's not the place where they will thrive. Why spend $95,000 a year to potentially not even kind of come out of school with a job? Yeah, that's right. Just because you go to Harvard doesn't mean you get a job. You still need to be one of the best in your class. You still need to excel. Yeah, you're going to get a lot of networking done, and you're going to have Harvard on your resume. But if you didn't take advantage of any of the research because you were too busy getting your first B's ever and struggling, and you didn't connect with any professors, you were so stressed the whole time, you didn't actually join any clubs. Are you getting the most out of your education? Probably not. So focus on what you need to be successful, what you need out of your school. A lot of people don't know this, but the Ivies, Harvard, Yale, UPenn, and Princeton, those four specifically, once you're on campus, it's actually really hard to navigate and get into organizations and clubs. It's another application process, and they're uber selective. And so all of a sudden, you didn't get into these three clubs, even though you were a club president and three different clubs at school, and you're not doing anything with your time there. Consider why that school makes sense for you, especially when you have good in-state options. Yield is the number of students who are offered admission that end up going. And that number again matters because of ranking. The higher your yield, the better. So as you can imagine, schools like Harvard and so on have very high yields. For Harvard, actually 2 years ago, I have that data. It was an 88% yield. 88% of the students who were admitted to Harvard went. That's an insanely high number, as you can imagine. So my point here is this: don't focus on the name, focus on what you need to be successful. And in doing so, you will have a much less stressful process and a lot more options. So, to wrap things up before we go to questions, not every college is getting more selective. In fact, many schools are seeing a downturn in applications because people seem to think that because of test option or not, they're all going to apply to these same 60, 70 schools. There's a lot of colleges out there who will offer you money to attend. And that doesn't mean they're any less impressive of an institution. It just means that they aren't focused on the same things that you are with the prestige. Taking easier classes to boost your GPA is a good thing. No, you should take the most rigorous schedule you can handle. And no, you shouldn't ignore the SAT or ACT because thousands of colleges are still test optional. We're expecting that to shift more and more back to test required, the more selective and the redder the state, meaning the more conservative the state. Florida and Georgia, for example, never actually went test optional. Those two states remain test required even during COVID. To them, COVID wasn't necessarily something to deal with, so test centers remained open. We're seeing a number of highly selective schools like Harvard and so on go back to test requirement, and we're expecting more to do so. So I'm encouraging all of my students to prepare for the SAT and ACT. Writing your college essay about something impressive just makes it a boring essay. Because if you're writing about something impressive, it's probably already in your activity section. I'm not learning anything new about you. You're hiding behind your accomplishments. Be open, be honest, do not be repetitive. Let me in and let me get to know you in a way that would make me want to spend time with you. Nobody wants to hang out with the kid who tells them how they're better than you. Think of it that way. And for activities, you don't need to do more activities. You need to do more within your activities. 5, 6 activities is more than okay for a majority of colleges out there. Sure, a number of students will have 10 activities, but a lot of the time, those activities are just being a member of a club that they go to once a month, right? The quality is more important than the quantity. And if you remember these, or you email me after to get the slides so you can remember them after, this will benefit you hugely as you navigate this process. So this in mind, folks, I see that there are about 80 questions that have come in since I last checked. So I'm going to start going through those questions. Bear with me. And obviously for any of you who have to jump, this is being recorded. Thank you for your time. Back to questions here. How is the full early college program viewed for admissions, where a child is fully at Montgomery College for junior and senior year? It is very beneficial for students who are looking to stay in state or go to colleges who are acutely aware of the EC program. Okay. So UMD, UMBC, Eastern Shore, Coppin State, even the schools in Virginia and so on. These are good schools to be considering if you're doing the early college program. If you're doing that with the intent of pursuing highly selectives or schools out west or who are less familiar, it's not as beneficial. If it's not too much trouble, could you, how do schools look at internships during 12th grade? We covered that. Are you allowed to start the Common App as junior year? We covered that. Yes, you can. Should we be asking teachers for letters of rec? The general rule of thumb is right around May, June time of junior year, right before the end of the year. You don't want to ask too early, especially like April time, because teachers are still teaching. You want to be respectful of the time of year, but you don't want to wait till senior year because their dockets may be full. I tend to say around second or third week of May. I usually say go in line with sort of the AP timeline. As APs are finishing, is a good time to start. These days is not answering demographic questions on the Common App help or hurt. Well, some demographic questions you have to answer, right? But my general rule of thumb is the questions are being asked for a reason. You don't have to answer them. Like if it asks you how you identify or what your background is religiously, tell me why you wouldn't answer it. I have a student right now who was afraid to answer that he was Jewish on there. And as a Jew myself, that pained me to know that we kind of live in a day and age where Jews are kind of feeling like I shouldn't tell people because like, what if like that school had a bunch of pro-Palestinian things on there? They're worried that Jews won't be safe. Stop thinking like that. Share with them who you are. Think of this as a mural. The more you answer, the more they can shade in who you are and learn about you. I say, always answer the demographic questions. What factors typically determine acceptance into merit-based scholarships or honors programs? Grades and course rigor / grades and test scores, usually. A lot of state schools actually put on their website what grade, what GPA / test score you need to get merit aid. Look at University of Arizona or University of Alabama, for example. If you type in University of Alabama merit scholarships, they have a one-sheeter to tell you if you have this GPA and this grade, this test score, you will get $20,000 a year. A lot of public schools tend to be very open with that, at least the ones who do it. UNC, Michigan, UVA, you're not getting a dime, but you might be able to get into their honors programs. What is the first step for a student to figure out what school may be a good fit if the student does not know if they want a big versus small, far versus close? Love that question. You get an A tonight. The first thing you do, you go visit UMD. Go walk around a local large school campus. Your kid might go, I don't want to be in the backyard. I don't want to go to College Park. I don't care. Go look at the school. And then maybe go up to Goucher or Hood or go over to the Eastern Shore and see Salisbury, right? There's a number, or go into the city and see American. There's a number of schools close enough to you either by metro or car or bus, that you can see what's out there. From there, you can start to identify how close you want to be to a city, how large of a school you're comfortable with. And then after that, pretty darn easy to start using that to identify other schools of that size and nature, keeping that information in mind. But there are two questions I think are always valuable to ask. Depending on like, do I like where I live now? And not just like, do I like the scenery, but do I like the access I have or don't have to DC or Baltimore, right? Do I like the suburban area I live in? Do I like the diversity or lack thereof of the place I live? Consider what you have around you in that sense. And right now, you're probably in a school of 2 to 3,000 people. Does that feel really big and scary? Is it way too small for you? Those are questions you can ask to compare your current environment to the one you might be seeking. You mentioned talking about schools in the South. What was the topic? Testing. Are there AP classes that colleges will think are more valuable to do, such as science, math, or language? That's all dependent on your major, right? Like if you're pursuing engineering and all your APs are on the humanities, I'm going to wonder what gives, right? The truth is, the more selective the school, the more all your classes should be in the APIB realm these days, right? But if you're trying to balance it, I would focus on which areas are more interesting to you. When colleges look at applications, they look at a school by school basis, as in focusing on comparing people who come from the same school and admitting only certain amounts of kids from that school. It's a loaded question. They really look at county, right? So they're going to compare students across Montgomery County. Like a couple of years ago, I saw that University of Chicago, because I got the data, took 5 students from Richard Montgomery, but took 0 from BCC, WJ, and some others. And so right there, you're looking, it's not like they're looking for it on a school by school basis. They're going to try and have the most diverse student body they can. So they tend to look at zip code in that case. So not necessarily just school, but zip code to help them with that diversity quotient. But it's not a school thing, it's more of a county thing. How much does demonstrated interest matter? School by school basis. It's a really good question, but if a school tracks demonstrated interest, it matters a lot. Okay. I'm going to post something before we sign off, a link I love for schools that track demonstrated interest. I just have to stop sharing my screen, so I'll do it at the very end. But it's a really good question. If a school tracks demonstrated interest, doing an online info session or in-person visit is always a good idea. All right. For activities, should I list my application activities I did for 2 years but then stopped? Depends. Did you stop because of an injury? Did you stop because you didn't like it? If it's a sport you stop because of an injury, yeah, your knee gave out, man. You have to stop wrestling. Of course, yeah, you enlist that. You did it 9th and 10th grade, then fell in love with it. Well, what'd you do instead? That's what I'm going to care about. Now, if you have room, you could certainly list it, but it's a lot less important to me if you did it and stopped it than if you're doing it or continuing to do it. Yes, this is being recorded and will be shared. Can schools see if you open their email lists? The general rule of thumb is if a school is smaller and you're interested in smaller schools, say a Lehigh, I say open the email, count to 5, delete the email, or open it and actually read. It's the preference, but I know my high schoolers. Because here's the thing, especially towards the end of junior year, you're going to start getting that hundreds of emails in a week. It's impossible to track all that and do that for every school. But yeah, the smaller schools tend to track that stuff. Large state schools, Ivy, so on, they don't, but smaller liberal arts colleges definitely do. So if that's the way you're leaning, you should definitely do it. And going back to the demonstrated interest piece, if a school is within a 3 to 4 hour drive and you have access to a vehicle, the general rule of thumb is that you should do that in person. So Lehigh is a good example. I don't see many students get in from Montgomery County to Lehigh anymore, even in early decision, the binding contract, who did not do some form of in-person demonstrated interest. Why? Because it's a 3 hour drive. Now, say a student doesn't have a car. There's other ways to do it. You do online info sessions. You email your admissions officer and ask if they're going to be in the area. And then you meet them and they come to your school, because Lehigh goes to pretty much every MCPS school and goes to local college fairs. And if you do that, you don't necessarily have to go to campus. There's a number of ways to show that demonstrated interest. Is a smaller liberal arts college more preferable than a larger school? I'm the beholder. I don't get to answer that for you. I went to a small liberal arts college. It was the right thing for me, but it's not the right thing for everyone. I think they're great. They give you a well-rounded education. A number of them do give good merit aid to make it more cost efficient. But You may not like the idea of being in a class of six people, your senior year thesis. I did. If a sibling is already there, will schools like you more or less? Well, it depends. Is your student in good standing? Your sibling might be in a fraternity who just got in trouble, right? Your sibling might be one of the biggest members of the Key Club and Booster Club. I don't know. It tends to help if a student is already there, but you got to do your part. Like if your sibling goes to Tulane and you have a 3.2 GPA, doesn't really matter that your sibling's there. You got to still maintain the expectations, but if you do that and your sibling's there, it can help. How much is the MoCo grade change going to impact? We don't know yet. It's a good question, but we don't yet know because we only have Q1. We haven't even seen the first semester grades. What I can tell you is why they did this. MoCo had too many 4.0s, unweighted 4.0s. There are just too many of them. Students who would get a B could just get an A and be fine for the semester. And so for the kid who actually maintained A's throughout all four quarters, it didn't benefit that kid the way it should for putting the effort in across the board, not going from lazy to work hard just to get there, right? Going back to that question about genuine interest, like the kid who maintains A's throughout all of high school is a kid who shows a genuine love of learning. The kid who does the A/B thing in Q1 to Q2 just shows me they figured out the system and the game, right? So my guess here is that the MoCo grading change is going to help the student who actually puts the time in at all times to stand out more, which is the ideal case here. Is there any legacy benefit if it's an aunt or friend of the family? Well, each school will tell you what legacy matters because if a legacy matters to a school, there'll be a section where they ask about family that goes there, and then there'll be a drop down of parent or grandparent or aunt or uncle. So if it's an aunt who went there, that's not an option. That's the way of telling you they don't care about that legacy. And for the record, legacy really only matters in early decision. If you don't go ED, they are restrictive early action, which is the Ivy's like Yale and Harvard's version of ED. They won't care. We're going to keep answering questions, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can post that thing that the person asked about demonstrated interest. Um, Give me a moment here. While I'm doing that, please feel free to keep sending me questions. I promise I can multitask. All right. Here is the demonstrated interest link. On this link, you're going to be able to use this to see which schools track it and which schools do not. The reason that this is a useful tool, folks, many people will decide that they're going to go see Princeton and then Columbia over spring break, and then maybe go up to Brown in Providence, Rhode Island. Not a single one of those three schools cares if you visit once, let alone 10 times. There's a number of schools that you're probably considering or open to that do care, and that will take that into consideration when you apply. So I would use that tool to understand which schools actually track it. And heck, maybe you end up in a place where like Fordham University in the Bronx in New York, they track it. You're already in New York. Maybe you go to Columbia from there and see it anyways. But if you're in an area where there's a school that does track it, you should absolutely do it. When you apply on the Common App, you can only select one school as ED. What if you don't get in ED? Can you select another school for ED after not getting in? If you're not admitted ED or you're admitted but not for the program you selected, right? So let's use Northeastern as an example. You get into Northeastern early decision, right? But they offer you for your secondary major, not your first. You chose comp sci, but they gave you philosophy. The moment they don't give you the exact thing you said I would bind myself for, or they don't admit you, you're broken into that ED contract. Once you're broken, you can potentially ED2 to a second school. ED2 is offered by a number of institutions who will allow you to do it in the second round. So Northeastern, Boston College, who else here? Vanderbilt, Emory, Washington University, Lehigh. There's hundreds that offer ED2. And the reason's simple. They know that there's a lot of people who are going to apply ED to your Ivy levels and Duke and so on. And so they want to catch the students who don't get in a second round of ED2 and get more applications. The general rule of thumb is ED2 tends to be a bit of a funnel. You have 100 people who applied ED to Columbia from your area, making up a number. Let's say 8 of them get in, right? Okay. Now 92 people were not admitted to ED. What do you think happens there? Do you think they ED2 to a school like University of Rochester, which has great research for science students, by the way? No. They ED2 to the same five schools. Vanderbilt, Emory, Wash U, Northwestern, BC, right? And all of a sudden they all get kind of stuck in this funnel because they're only taking so many. So my recommendation isn't to do ED1, Ivy, ED2, Wash U. It's if Wash U or some other school is your number one, do that in ED1. Because it tends if they have ED1 and ED2, they're going to have a lot of ED2 applicants from schools that didn't accept them in ED1. And a lot of the time, ED2 has a lower admit rate than ED1 because they've already taken a good number in ED1. My point is, I'm getting into the nitty gritty. Don't go, I'm going to shoot for the highest, and then for the next highest. Maybe shoot for the next highest. Be strategic in your approach here, unless you truly are an exceptional candidate who should be shooting ED1 to that uber selective single digit admit rate school. But that is its own entire conversation. I'd be happy to have it with anyone, but that answers the question, I think. I think we have time for one more question before we wrap up here. Oh, I missed one. What is the recommended number of recommendations? You want to ideally ask two teachers for recommendation, and they should, generally speaking, be two junior year teachers. They don't have to be. Theoretically, you could ask a sophomore year teacher. The reason it should be two junior year teachers is these are the most recent version, you can speak to the most recent version of who you are. So the one time I remember a student having a really good 10th grade option, that teacher was their teacher in 9th and 10th grade, and was the liaison and advisor for the club that the student started in junior year. So that student still had a lot of access to that teacher, so it made sense. But generally speaking, if you ask one from 10th grade and one from 11th grade, well, realistically, what are you telling me? You only connected with one teacher this past year? You only had one person you liked? So you usually want to ask for two teacher recommendations. You'll always need a counselor recommendation, your school counselor. And before you stress, like, oh my gosh, my school counselor is brand new, I don't know them, that's totally okay. The counselor recommendation is meant for sort of two things. The first is to reaffirm that you haven't been expelled or had any issues or red flags on your time in high school. The second is by requesting that counselor rec, it comes with your transcript and that school report we referenced a few times. Your counselor will ask you to fill out a brag sheet, as will your teachers. Those should be done towards the end of junior year, early summer, before you're too busy with college applications. But you'll need two teachers and a counselor. The last thing, you could theoretically get an external recommendation. An external recommendation is allowed by some schools, not all, but some schools, where you can use that as a way to learn about you outside of school. Maybe it's a club coach you've had for many years, a mentor that you've had who's helped you kind of through your life, your boss from your internship. The general rule of thumb is you only ask for an external recommendation if you know it's going to add value. Otherwise, you are wasting time. And yes, you should prioritize core teachers you know best, your core teachers, or a teacher connected to your major. So let's say that you're pursuing computer science. AP Comp Sci is not a core class, but if it's connected to your major, could be a really good option. With our semester-based schedule, should we prioritize four-year teachers? It doesn't need to be full year. It can be, as long as that teacher knew you really well, that's all I care about. Sometimes full year is easier because they know you over that. But band, I would not ask band. Great question. Band is not a core curriculum class. It's not an academic class. They can't speak to who you are in an academic setting. Unless, of course, you are being recruited to be a member of a band at a school or you're pursuing a BFA, a Bachelor in Fine Arts, I tend to stay away from band. On that note, it is 7:32. I've taken up 2 more minutes than I meant to. I apologize. One last time, I'm putting my email in the chat. Feel free to email me. I can send you the slides. Miss Heald will be sharing out the recording later tonight or tomorrow with all of your school CCNs. She will also send it to me so that if you email me, I can send it to you. Thank you for your time. I appreciate all the great questions. I hope you all have an amazing holiday season and stay warm. And I look forward to see you on our next one.